Have you ever tried really hard to change something in your life, only to realize the more you tried, the more stuck you felt? Have you ever chased peace, happiness, or control so fiercely that all you found in return was exhaustion? If you know that feeling, if you've been on the treadmill of trying to fix, trying to force, trying to figure it all out, this video is for you. Because today we're not going to talk about how to hustle harder. We're going to talk about how to surrender deeper. But hold up, when I say surrender, I don't mean giving up. I don't mean waving a white flag and walking away from your life. No, I mean something more powerful, something more subtle. I mean the kind of surrender that leads you to freedom, the kind that melts resistance, the kind that brings you into harmony with life, not because you've mastered it, but because you finally stopped trying to dominate it. Today's journey is inspired by the wisdom of Alan Watts, one of the most potent voices of the 20th century, a bridge between Eastern philosophy and Western chaos. We'll explore what it means to live a life not built on constant calculation and struggle, but one that flows effortlessly, like a river that knows exactly where it's going, even if it doesn't have a map. So take a breath. Wherever you are right now, on the train, in your room, walking under the sky, pause. Feel your body. Let your shoulders drop. Allow yourself to just be here. No performance. No pressure. This video is not going to tell you what to do. It's going to invite you to feel something, to question the assumptions that keep you tense, to remember something deep and ancient that your nervous system already knows, but your mind forgot, that you're not here to control life. You're here to participate in it. We're going to talk about the uncalculated life, the kind of life where wisdom doesn't come from knowing more, but from resisting less. We'll touch on the nature of grace, the illusion of egoic control, and the quiet truth that real transformation happens the moment you stop striving. And yes, if this is the kind of conversation you want more of, please don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Share it with someone who's been white-knuckling their way through life. Subscribe if you haven't already. We're building a beautiful, thoughtful space here. And if you feel like supporting the channel directly, you can always hit that super thanks button and help keep this philosophical flame alive. This isn't content. This is practice. This is contemplation. This is space. So, if you're ready to see why surrender is not weakness, but the most courageous act of all, why letting go might just be the way home, then stay with me. Let's begin. You invariably get what you want. At first glance, this idea seems absurd if not outright offensive. How could someone who just got fired, went through a painful divorce, or was diagnosed with a terminal illness ever be told they got what they wanted? It sounds like spiritual victim blaming. And yet, Alan Watts wasn't trying to be cruel or provocative. He was inviting us to explore a deeply uncomfortable but illuminating truth, that our desires, conscious and unconscious, shape our lives far more profoundly than we care to admit. What you call life happening to you may, in a much deeper way, be life reflecting you. To understand this idea, we have to discard our typical assumption that wanting means the conscious voice in our head that makes to-do lists and says, I want a better job, or I want to be in a healthy relationship. Because let's be honest, how many people do you know who say they want a healthy relationship, but keep dating the same emotionally unavailable, chaotic people over and over again? At some point, it's no longer just bad luck. At some point, it becomes a pattern. And behind every pattern is a deeper architecture of unconscious desire. This is where Watts reframes want not as surface-level intention, but as an entire energetic signature, your emotional defaults, your beliefs, your hidden narratives. That's your karma. Not karma in the sense of cosmic punishment or reward, but karma as causality. Not moral, but mechanical. Just like dropping a ball makes it bounce, certain patterns of thought, behavior, and emotion will lead to predictable outcomes. And these outcomes, whether you like them or not, are the echoes of what you've projected. Let's take a common example. Someone who consistently finds themselves underappreciated at work. They change companies, even industries, but always end up with a boss who takes credit for their work, or a team that overlooks their contributions. Consciously, they may feel outraged, even betrayed. But beneath the surface, There might be an unconscious belief. I need to prove my worth. I'm only valuable when I'm the underdog. So they gravitate toward environments that mirror that internal script. And the world, obligingly, gives them exactly what they want, not the happiness they think they deserve, but the drama their deeper self is addicted to. This is the sting in Watt's point. When he says you always get what you want, he's not saying you always get what you like. He's saying you get what matches your internal world. And most of us don't truly know what we want, because most of our wants are hidden in the basement of the psyche running the show while we think we're in control. That's why Watts warns against defining the self only by voluntary conscious behavior. Because that's like saying the ocean is only what you can see above the waves. The real mass is submerged. And unless you know the full weight of your psychological, emotional, and spiritual undercurrents, you'll live your life mystified by the things that keep happening to you. You'll say, why does this keep happening to me? When the real question is, what part of me keeps choosing this? Another useful example. Think of someone who always ends up in financial trouble. They get a job, save a bit, and somehow they blow it all on impulse purchases, bad investments, or trusting the wrong people. They tell themselves they want stability. But the reality is, part of them might fear what comes with stability. The responsibility, the stillness, the loss of drama. So chaos feels more familiar, more exciting. They're not financially unlucky, they're addicted to the emotional roller coaster of crisis and recovery. And life, like a faithful mirror, obliges. Now, why is this so hard to accept? Because it smashes the comforting illusion that we are helpless, that life is just a string of random accidents. It's easier to blame fate, parents, society, or God than to face the terrifying possibility that we might be complicit in our own suffering. That's why Watt's teaching here isn't a gentle suggestion, it's a confrontation. He's saying, look again, not with guilt or shame, but with radical curiosity. What if you stopped seeing life as something that happens to you and started seeing it as something that arises through you? To make this shift, you have to develop what's been called meta-awareness, the ability to observe your own patterns, not just your actions. It's not enough to say, I want love or I want peace if you're still wired for conflict or scarcity. The unconscious doesn't care what you say. It cares what you believe, what you fear, what you fantasize about when no one's watching. That's what shapes your life. And here's the paradox. When you realize that everything you've experienced is in some way what you've energetically asked for, you stop being a victim, but you also stop being a tyrant. You stop trying to force life to go your way. Instead, you listen. You become a student of your own patterns. And from there, real change becomes possible not because you push harder, but because you finally understand what you've actually been asking for. This also explains why change is so difficult. People say they want transformation, but most of the time, they just want the rewards of change without the discomfort. They want new results, but they don't want to rewrite the script. And so, life keeps delivering the old outcome because it fits the old pattern. It's like trying to lose weight without changing your eating habits, or trying to find love without healing your fear of intimacy. The words might be different, but the frequency is the same. And in the universe of karma, frequency, not language, determines result. This is not a call to blame yourself for everything bad that's ever happened to you. It's a call to look deeper than blame, to see how unconscious wants can be more powerful than conscious decisions. To recognize that your life isn't just happening, it's happening in rhythm with your inner world. So when Watts says, you always get what you want, he's not saying life is fair. He's saying life is coherent. There's a strange kind of justice in it, not moral justice, but energetic resonance. And once you get that, you stop asking, why is this happening to me? And start asking, what part of me made this inevitable? This kind of inquiry is brutal, but it's also liberating. Because if your inner world created your outer reality, then shifting your reality doesn't start with the world, it starts with you. Not with effort, but with awareness. Not with force, but with honesty. That's the essence of what Watts was teaching. Not that you should be ashamed of what you've created, but that you should become curious about it. Because once you see the link between desire and outcome, the illusion of helplessness dissolves. You don't need to control life, you need to understand the part of you that's always been steering it, even when you didn't know it. So the next time you find yourself in a loop, whether in love, money, conflict, or self-doubt, ask not just what's happening, but why it feels familiar. Ask what part of you keeps choosing this. Ask what unspoken desire this reality fulfills. And then, gently, begin to shift not by force, but by seeing. Because when you change what you truly want, not just what you say you want, life will start giving you something different. And that, perhaps, is the most powerful kind of freedom. Alan Watts often challenged one of the most cherished assumptions in Western thought, the idea that the self, the ego, is the central, autonomous commander of our lives. According to Watts, what we usually think of as I is not a true center of control, but a reactive shell, a kind of narrative layer we construct to make sense of what's already unfolding. We live under the illusion that we are steering the ship, when in reality, we're more like passengers constructing a story about the ride. He illustrates this brilliantly with a simple metaphor. A child sitting in the passenger seat of a car, holding a plastic toy steering wheel. The child turns the wheel enthusiastically, believing they are controlling the car. Meanwhile, the parent drives, unaffected. This is how the ego operates. It mimics the motions of control, clings to the belief that it is making things happen, and builds an identity on that illusion. But the real mechanics of life, our unconscious processes, biological imperatives, cultural conditioning, and environmental forces are what truly drive us. The ego reacts, narrates, justifies, and claims authorship after the fact. It's more of a publicist than a pilot. This dissonance between perceived control and actual control leads to one of the most dangerous psychological traps: spiritual inflation. This happens when someone, after a moment of mystical insight, say, during meditation, or under the influence of psychedelics, suddenly feels the boundaries between self and universe dissolve. This can be profound, humbling, even healing. But without grounding, the ego doesn't dissolve, it expands. It grabs hold of that sensation of unity and says, I must be God. What was supposed to be a transcendence of the self becomes a grotesque enlargement of it. The person believes they are enlightened, above human convention, answerable to no one. We see it in certain cult leaders, in New Age influencers, in anyone who confuses mystical experience with personal exceptionalism. They're not transcending the ego, they're just inflating it. One reason this trap is so potent is that it masquerades as enlightenment. It feels transcendent. It gives the illusion of divine connection. But it's fundamentally rooted in the same dualism it claims to transcend: the I and the other, the awakened and the asleep. True insight, by contrast, often leads to humility, silence, and a deeper sense of connection, not superiority. This confusion arises because our culture has so deeply embedded the idea of ego as the self. From childhood, we're taught that you are your thoughts, your preferences, your achievements. We're encouraged to brand ourselves, to cultivate uniqueness, to declare independence from the collective. So when we begin to sense that we are, in fact, connected to a larger whole, that our sense of self is porous and contingent, the ego doesn't step aside. It adapts. It claims that insight, too, as part of its empire. In doing so, it becomes even more dangerous. A fragile ego can be cruel, but a spiritualized ego can be messianic. Consider someone like Charles Manson. He didn't just claim to have spiritual insight. He believed he was an incarnation of divine truth. Or more mildly, think of that friend who discovered meditation last month and now lectures everyone on mindfulness, despite having unresolved anger, insecurity, or need for validation. The ego uses spiritual language to mask its own dysfunctions. It becomes harder to detect because it wears robes of wisdom. Even outside spiritual contexts, this dynamic plays out. Take business leaders or tech founders who become obsessed with their vision, convinced they are ushering in a new world. They speak in terms of disruption, of destiny, and yes, some truly innovate. But others, intoxicated by their own power, begin to believe they are above regulation, ethics, or human limits. They think they're bending reality through sheer will. But often, they're simply riding the wave of collective effort, market trends, or privilege while their ego spins a narrative of genius. Alan Watts wasn't dismissing the ego as evil. He understood its function. The ego helps us navigate social life. It's a tool, a useful fiction. Problems arise when we mistake the tool for the user. When we believe the mask is our face. When we forget that the I narrating the story of our life is not the author, but more like a commentator with selective memory and strong opinions. This misunderstanding leads to suffering in subtle ways. When things go wrong, we blame ourselves as if we were omnipotent. When things go right, we take credit as if we pulled all the strings. Either way, we reinforce the myth that I am in control. This fuels anxiety, perfectionism, and shame. We try harder. We meditate harder. We seek gurus, self-help books, or systems to master life. All of it is an attempt to reinforce the illusion of egoic control. But what encourages us to look deeper? He invites us to consider that perhaps we are not the doer, but the doing. Not the thinker, but the thought. Not the drop, but the wave. In this view, the ego is not eliminated, it's recontextualized. It's no longer the king of consciousness, but a part of a much larger ecology of being. And this is where true peace begins, not through domination, but through surrender. To illustrate this further, think of a jazz musician improvising. If she tries to control every note, the performance becomes stiff, lifeless. But if she lets go, allows the music to move through her, she becomes the instrument rather than the player. That's the state Watts is pointing to, a way of living where the ego stops pretending to be in charge and instead becomes part of the dance. And that's the real challenge. It's not to kill the ego, but to see through it, to recognize its narratives without believing them, to let go of the need to be special, to be right, to be in control. Because the ego's need for control is what keeps us disconnected from each other, from the world, from ourselves. In practical terms, this means noticing when you're trying to force life to fit your script. It means catching yourself when you turn a spiritual insight into a performance. It means letting go of the story that you are the central character and realizing you're one note in a vast improvisational symphony. This awareness doesn't make you passive. It makes you present. You still act, choose, engage, but from a place of flow rather than force. You stop trying to prove yourself and start expressing yourself. You stop striving to be in control and start participating in the process. In that state, something beautiful happens. Life becomes less of a struggle and more of a conversation. You don't need to inflate yourself because you no longer feel separate. You don't need to dominate others because you see them as part of you. And you don't need to cling to mystical experiences because you realize the sacred is already here in every moment, every breath, every interaction. So when Watts speaks of ego and control, he's not condemning you. He's freeing you. He's pointing out that the steering wheel in your hands is plastic, and that's okay. The ride is still real. The scenery still moves. But now you can relax. You can watch. You can play. And in doing so, you might finally feel what it's like to be truly alive, not as a controller, but as a participant in the great unfolding. The concept of karma, especially as explored by Alan Watts, often requires a complete reframing of how we perceive responsibility, causality, and personal agency. In the West, karma is often misunderstood as some divine tally system: do good, earn good, do bad, receive punishment. But Watts approaches karma not as morality, but as mechanics. It's not about cosmic justice, but energetic continuity. Karma is not reward or punishment in the moral sense. It's the natural return of the energy we put out into the world, consciously or unconsciously. It is the echo of our actions, the resonance of our inner state played back to us through life events. This framework suggests something radical. Everything that happens to you is, in some way, a mirror of what has gone out of you, whether or not you were aware of putting it out there. And this idea becomes even more challenging when we apply it to the experiences we swear we never asked for. Because, let's face it, it's easy to accept karma when life gives you what you love. You landed your dream job? Great, you worked hard. Networked, projected confidence. It feels natural to take credit. But what about the job you didn't get? The partner who left you, the accident, the betrayal, the endless pattern of being overlooked, undervalued, or misunderstood. What if somehow those outcomes are also answers replies to a question you never knew you were asking? Take the case of someone who is constantly handed urgent last-minute tasks by their boss. On the surface, this person might complain, "Why me? Why am I the one always getting dumped on?" But dig a little deeper. Perhaps this individual has, throughout their career, derived a sense of identity from being the one who saves the day. They pride themselves on being reliable, indispensable, a quiet workhorse. Maybe they don't assert boundaries clearly, or they jump at the chance to help before even being asked. They might not consciously want to be overwhelmed, but they unconsciously want to be needed. And the boss, knowingly or not, responds to that energy. The result? A karmic loop where the individual keeps getting what they're unconsciously inviting. This is the karma Watts is talking about, the silent contract between your deeper self and the patterns of your life. You may say you don't want drama, but if you consistently react to calm with boredom and feel most alive when in conflict, life will keep serving you turmoil. You may swear you want peace, but if your internal monologue is dominated by grievance and suspicion, peace will never stick around. Your life follows the path of least energetic resistance. The outside reflects the inside. Now, this can feel like victim blaming, and it's crucial to clarify that that's not the point. The point is to challenge the passive stance that says, life is doing this to me. Because as long as you believe that you're simply being acted upon by forces beyond your control, you surrender your power to change. Recognizing the karmic return of your own unconscious patterns isn't about assigning blame, it's about reclaiming authorship. It means admitting that you may be more involved in your suffering than you realized, not to beat yourself up, but to wake yourself up. Think of someone who is perpetually surrounded by flaky friends, people who cancel last minute, don't follow through, or ghost entirely. They might say, "I always attract unreliable people." And yes, maybe they've had bad luck, but maybe, just maybe, also have a hard time voicing their expectations, setting boundaries, or confronting others. Maybe they unconsciously value being the understanding one, the one who never causes drama. So they suppress disappointment, don't speak up when they feel hurt, and then continue to magnetize relationships where that suppression becomes the norm. That's karma not as a cosmic punishment, but as a feedback loop of unresolved inner dynamics. This karmic principle also applies to those who find themselves repeatedly in toxic romantic relationships. It's not that they want to be mistreated, but there may be a subconscious attraction to intensity, to the emotional highs and lows, to the push-pull dynamic that mimics childhood patterns. If you grew up equating love with volatility, then stable affection might feel foreign, even dull. And without realizing it, you might keep selecting partners who confirm that drama equals intimacy. That's karma, your emotional blueprint, selecting experiences that echo its original design. And this is where the unconscious becomes central. What's emphasized that karma operates far beyond the threshold of conscious intent. It's not about what you think you want, it's about what your system, your conditioning, your emotional body is calibrated to. You might tell yourself, "I want to feel safe." But if you've spent your life in environments where safety was foreign, you might associate safety with stagnation or invisibility. So you chase thrill, risk, chaos. Not because you want to suffer, but because that's what feels familiar. That's what feels like home. This helps explain why people stay in jobs they hate, relationships that hurt, cycles that drain them. On the surface, they protest, they vent, they vow to change. But deep down, there's a story that says, "This is what I deserve," or "This is what I know how to handle." And until that story is rewritten, life will keep circling back to reinforce it. Not because life is cruel, but because karma is faithful. It delivers not what you wish for in fleeting moments of clarity, but what you rehearse in the background of your being. There's also a collective dimension to this. Karma isn't just personal, it's cultural, familial, generational. If your family has a pattern of scarcity thinking, you might inherit that lens without even knowing it. If your community rewards martyrdom, you might feel guilty for resting. If your culture prizes achievement above well-being, you might burn out chasing validation. These imprints shape your behavior, which shapes your environment, which shapes your perception, another feedback loop. Karma is not just about your actions. It's about the systems you unconsciously participate in. So what do we do with this realization? First, we pause. We stop trying to fix life at the surface level, swapping jobs, changing partners, rearranging circumstances without examining the deeper patterns underneath. We begin asking better questions. Not, why is this happening to me? But, what inside me resonates with this experience? Not, how do I stop this from happening again? But, what part of me keeps saying yes to this dynamic? These questions are uncomfortable, even confrontational, but they're also portals to transformation. Consider the story of someone who always feels invisible. They're overlooked in meetings, passed over in promotions, talked over in conversations. They carry a quiet sadness. No one sees me. But maybe, just maybe, they were taught early on that being seen is dangerous, that visibility brings judgment, vulnerability, even punishment. So they learn to shrink, to defer, to hide behind humility. They believe they want recognition, but their energy communicates withdrawal. Karma answers not the words they speak, but the frequency they emit. And so the world responds accordingly. Change, then, starts with radical self-honesty. It begins with the courage to ask, where have I been complicit in my own repetition? And again, this is not about blame. It's about power. Because once you see that your actions, even your silence, your hesitations, your inner scripts are shaping your reality, you can begin to shift them. You can rewire the inputs. You can rewrite the code. What wasn't offering this view to shame people, he was trying to free them. He was inviting us to step out of the victim-perpetrator game and into a more dynamic understanding of causality. He was saying, life is not happening to you. Life is happening through you. Your experiences are not accidents, they are responses. Your reality is not random, it's relational. And that means you're not powerless. In fact, you are more powerful than you ever realized, precisely because your unconscious is always in conversation with the universe. To embrace this is to stop being surprised when life repeats itself. It's to see every recurring challenge not as punishment, but as information. Karma becomes a curriculum, not a sentence. It shows you where you're stuck, what you're carrying, how you're projecting. It doesn't accuse you, it educates you. And that's the shift what points to. A life of reaction becomes a life of recognition. A life of repetition becomes a life of revision. You stop trying to escape the consequences of your unconscious behavior, and you start making your behavior conscious. Slowly, your internal world changes, and with it, your external reality does, too. Not overnight, not through force, but through awareness, inquiry, and the willingness to take full responsibility for the energy you are and the energy you emit. That's karma, not mystical, not punitive, but profoundly responsive. And once you see it, you can't unsee it. You stop waiting for the world to change, and you start changing the world from within. Alan Watts's insights into praise and blame strike at the heart of our psychological conditioning. He observed that in a culture driven by achievement, reputation, and external validation, people are constantly swinging between the highs of being praised and the lows of being blamed. But here's the uncomfortable truth. If you crave praise, you must also accept the inevitability of blame. The two are not separate, they are two ends of the same spectrum. In fact, they feed each other. The more you seek one, the more vulnerable you are to the other. And until you step outside this cycle, your emotional state remains at the mercy of public opinion, social mirrors, and fluctuating standards. This is where Watts introduces a kind of psychological non-duality. Praise and blame are not opposites in conflict. They are codependent twins. If you elevate praise as meaningful, then you must also accept that criticism carries weight. But if you begin to see that both are simply judgments, subjective evaluations based on transient standards, then you can begin to free yourself from their grip. This doesn't mean becoming indifferent in a nihilistic way. It means understanding the structure of duality itself. For instance, if you say someone is tall, it only makes sense in contrast to someone who is short. These concepts are relational, not absolute. Similarly, being good only exists in contrast to being bad. Being successful in contrast to being a failure. If you attach your identity to these labels, you become a character in a play written by others. And every scene depends on whether they applaud or boo. Consider someone working in a competitive corporate environment. They thrive on recognition. Every time they get praise from their manager, a client, a performance review, it gives them a rush of validation. They feel seen, affirmed, worthy. But the flip side is brutal. A minor piece of feedback, a missed opportunity, or someone else being promoted ahead of them triggers an existential crisis. Suddenly, they're not enough. The same mechanism that created the high now manufactures the crash. They are on a seesaw, up with praise, down with blame, and completely dependent on forces outside themselves. Watt saw this as a form of spiritual immaturity. He pointed out that people who are truly grounded, who have found something stable beneath the surface, don't get pulled into this emotional volatility. He tells a story of a wise sage, a silent master, who reacts with complete neutrality when his student tries to gossip about another monk. The student expects engagement, a comment, a reaction. Instead, the master says nothing. It's like throwing a rock into a deep well and hearing no splash. The silence is deafening. In that moment, the student is confronted not with the character of the person being gossiped about, but with his own need to judge, to elevate himself through comparison. That story isn't just mystical, it's deeply practical. We gossip because it makes us feel superior, safer, more righteous. When we judge others either positively or negatively, we're reinforcing a mental model where worth is assigned externally and relationally. I'm better because they're worse, or they're better, so I must be less. It's a zero-sum game, and it's exhausting. Think of how many relationships are subtly shaped by this logic. Friends who only call when they have good news, because they want praise. Parents who use praise and blame as tools to manipulate behavior, rather than expressions of genuine connection. Couples who fall into the trap of conditional love. I love you when you make me feel good, and I'm distant when you don't. It's all transactional, and it's all rooted in the illusion that our value fluctuates based on how others see us. Watt challenges this illusion. He invites us to see beyond the surface and to notice the emotional mechanism that seeks affirmation. He asks, what if your worth was not a pendulum between praise and blame, but something untouched by either? This isn't some abstract, spiritual notion, it's observable. You can start by noticing how your mood shifts when someone compliments you. Do you become attached to that praise? Do you begin to chase more of it? Then notice what happens when you're criticized. Does it feel like a threat? Do you spiral into defensiveness, shame, or anger? These reactions are not faults, they're human. But they are also opportunities. Every time you feel a spike of pride or a drop into shame, you're being shown where your identity is anchored. And often, it's not anchored within, it's hanging outside you, dangling from the words, looks, and opinions of others. This is not a stable foundation. It's emotional quicksand. Imagine a public figure, say, a well-known actor. Their entire sense of self might be built around public praise, awards, fan adoration, media approval. But what happens when the next film bombs? When critics turn on them? When social media erupts in backlash? That same machinery that elevated them now dismantles them. Unless they have something deeper, some sense of self that exists independent of praise or blame, they are left shattered. This isn't just a celebrity problem. It's a human problem. Social media has made everyone a mini public figure. Every post, every like, every comment becomes a microdose of praise or blame. We curate our lives to maximize approval, and we withhold parts of ourselves that might invite criticism. In doing so, we lose touch with authenticity. We become performers, addicts to applause. What's isn't saying praise is bad or that feedback should be ignored. What he's saying is, don't build your house there. Use feedback as information, not as identity. Accept praise with humility and criticism with curiosity. But do not let either define you. The goal is not to be beyond feedback, but to be beyond dependence on it. In practice, this means cultivating a kind of inner stillness. When someone praises you, observe the feeling, but don't grab it. When someone criticizes you, observe the sting, but don't armor up. Let both pass through you like wine through an open window. This is not detachment in the cold, aloof sense. It's presence. It's awareness. It's the ability to see praise and blame as weather, not climate. One of the most liberating realizations is that people's opinions are mostly about them, not you. When someone praises you, they're often projecting their own values, ideals, or needs. When they blame you, they're often reflecting their own fears, insecurities, or expectations. You become a screen for their inner movie. This doesn't mean their feedback is useless. It might contain truth. But it does mean that you must filter it through discernment, not dependency. Watts would probably say that the most powerful position is to be able to hear both praise and blame and not flinch, to take neither as gospel, and to remain rooted in a deeper sense of being. Not a story about who you are, but a direct experience of being alive, aware, and connected. This is not easy. It takes practice, honesty, and a willingness to let go of the ego's craving for control and affirmation. But the payoff is immense. You become less reactive, less defensive, less driven by fear. You stop trying to manage your image and start living your truth. You become someone others can trust, not because you never change, but because your core isn't tossed around by public opinion. And here's the paradox. The less you chase praise, the more genuine respect you earn. The less you fear blame, the more resilient you become. People can feel when you're grounded, when you're not performing, when you're real. And that authenticity, ironically, attracts the very connection we sought through approval. So the next time you catch yourself yearning for praise, pause. Ask yourself, what am I really seeking? Is it love? Belonging? Safety? Can I offer that to myself, even in small doses, instead of outsourcing it? And the next time blame hits, breathe. Don't rush to defend. Ask, is there truth here? Is this about me or about them? What can I learn without losing myself? In that space between reaction and response, you begin to grow. You stop being a puppet of external judgment and become a conscious participant in your own life. This is the shift Watts invites us to make, not from pride to shame, or from arrogance to humility, but from dependence to presence, from chasing applause to living aligned, from needing to be good to simply being whole. Be not anxious for the morrow is a line attributed to Jesus that has often been misinterpreted in ways that veer toward recklessness rather than insight. Taken at face value, it might sound like an invitation to abandon responsibility, to live carelessly, or to refuse planning altogether. In modern spiritual circles, this phrase is frequently cherry-picked as a justification for letting go, in a superficial sense, dropping commitments, avoiding structure, dismissing goals. But Alan Watts, in his nuanced analysis of the uncalculated life, offers a deeper and more grounded interpretation. He doesn't encourage us to live without attention or care. Instead, he points out that we already live without calculation more than we admit. The problem isn't that we need to live spontaneously, it's that we falsely believe we aren't already doing so. Watts flips the common assumption on its head. We often think of ourselves as highly rational creatures, making deliberate choices based on analysis and foresight. We plan our careers, set our budgets, write our goals, imagine our futures. But underneath this surface of intentionality lies a massive undercurrent of automatic behavior. The vast majority of what we do is not calculated at all. It's reactive, instinctual, habitual. We dress ourselves in narratives of control, but these are mostly after-the-fact explanations. Our actual movement through life, the choices we make, the things we avoid, the paths we walk is more like a river than a highway. The flow emerges, and we interpret it as decision. To make this real, imagine someone who proudly declares, "I've decided to become a doctor because I want to help people." That sounds noble and intentional, but dig deeper, and you might find that they grew up in a household that idealized medicine, or they were praised for being smart and responsible, or they internalized early on that healing others made them lovable. Their choice may be less about helping people and more about reinforcing a self-image that was constructed in childhood. It's not that their work is disingenuous, it might be deeply meaningful. But it's not calculated in the cold, logical sense. It's an unfolding of internal conditioning, shaped by a lifetime of impressions. Watts argues that recognizing this doesn't diminish our agency. It liberates us from the pressure of pretending we are in complete control. He's not anti-choice, he's anti-illusion. He wants us to see that the need to feel like we're always choosing is itself a performance. We do what we do, then invent stories about why we did it. And the more invested we are in those stories, the more we suffer when life veers off script. We cling to the belief that our plans matter more than the flow of events. When they don't work out, we call it failure. But Watts invites us to see that it was never truly about the plans to begin with. It was about how we showed up to the moment. There's a huge difference between living spontaneously and living reactively. The former is about attunement to the present. The latter is about unconsciousness. People who misunderstand the uncalculated life sometimes confuse it with impulsivity. They hear Watts or read Eastern philosophy and conclude that they should abandon everything, quit their jobs, leave their relationships, reject structure. They call it freedom, but often it's escapism. A person who drops all responsibility in the name of living in the now might actually be fleeing from discomfort, avoiding intimacy, or rebelling against the constraints of adulthood. That's not living freely, that's living in denial. Imagine a young man who reads spiritual texts and decides that true living means rejecting society's expectations. He quits his job, breaks up with his partner, and moves to a cabin in the woods. At first, it feels exhilarating. No schedules, no emails, no obligations. But as the weeks turn into months, a restlessness sets in. He realizes that while he escaped the demands of others, he hasn't escaped himself. His mind still clings to comparison, still longs for recognition, still spins stories about what it means to be authentic. Eventually, he may come to see that living without structure isn't the same as living without delusion. The ego can thrive just as easily in a forest as in a boardroom. This is where Watts's point lands with such clarity. You have always been living the uncalculated life. Even the decisions you think you carefully made were part of a larger current. The planning mind likes to take credit, but it is only a small fragment of who you are. Your desires, your fears, your intuitions, your environment, your upbringing, all these forces move through you. What feels like free will is often a constellation of unconscious processes dressed up in rational language. And that's not a tragedy. That's grace. What suggests that when you stop clinging to the illusion of control, you begin to feel the beauty of being carried. Life doesn't need you to direct it like a CEO managing a company. It needs you to participate in it like a dancer moving with music. Not dominating, not resisting, just listening and responding. In this sense, the uncalculated life is not aimless. It is deeply intentional, but in a way that arises from wholeness, not from the fragmented ego trying to prove itself. This is hard to grasp in a culture that worships hustle, vision boards, 5-year plans, and self-optimization. We're told that success belongs to those who strategize, who grind, who manifest. But what's often left out is that many people who end up doing extraordinary things never planned them. They stumbled into purpose. They followed their curiosity. They responded to what life placed in front of them. And in hindsight, It all looks like destiny. But in the moment, it felt like confusion, like improvisation, like listening. Think of Steve Jobs dropping out of college and taking a calligraphy class just for fun. He didn't know that years later, that interest would shape the typography of the first Mac computer. Or consider J.K. Rowling scribbling Harry Potter ideas on napkins while on welfare, not to chase fame, but to cope with her own suffering. These stories are not exceptions, they are illustrations of what means. When you live with attention but without rigid calculation, life organizes itself around something deeper than your plans. The script writes itself. This doesn't mean you never plan. It means you hold your plans lightly. You stay open to adjustment. You remain available to surprise. Watts's philosophy is not anti-goal. It's anti-attachment. It's about realizing that even your goals come from somewhere often not from you, but through you. The uncalculated life honors that movement. It trusts that what needs to happen will find its way, with or without your anxious effort. And here's the irony. The more you surrender the need to control, the more influence you actually have. Not because you manipulate outcomes, but because you align with the momentum of what's true. Your actions become clearer. Your presence becomes more grounded. Your decisions become less about fear and more about resonance. You begin to act not from what should I do, but from what feels aligned now. That's not laziness, it's attunement. This shift can be disorienting at first. If you spent your life striving, achieving, competing, and perfecting, the idea of letting go feels like a loss of identity. Who are you if you're not improving yourself every day? Who are you if you're not chasing the next goal? But in that space of not knowing, something deeper emerges. You discover a sense of being that is not dependent on performance. You experience a freedom that isn't about doing whatever you want, but about being exactly where you are fully, honestly, without resistance. The uncalculated life also changes how we relate to time. When we stop obsessing over the future, we begin to inhabit the present with more fullness. We stop treating now as a means to later. We stop living in anticipation. This doesn't mean we become passive or short-sighted. It means we realize that the quality of this moment is not determined by what it leads to, but by how deeply we meet it. A walk with a friend, a bite of food, a single breath. These are not interruptions in our path, they are the path. Watts would likely say that true spirituality is not about escaping the world or renouncing ambition. It's about seeing through the false logic of control. It's about knowing that you never really had control to begin with, and that your desperate attempts to seize it only obscure your natural intelligence. That intelligence is always working. Your body knows how to heal a wound without your help. Your heart beats without instruction. Your breath flows on its own. Life moves, and you move with it. You don't need to force it. You just need to notice it. This recognition doesn't make you passive, it makes you potent. Because now, your actions are not reactive. They are expressions of presence. You still get things done. You still show up. But you do so from clarity, not compulsion. From response, not reflex. From freedom, not fear. To live the uncalculated life, then, is not to abandon thought. It is to stop mistaking thought for truth. It is to use the mind as a tool, not a tyrant. It is to allow life to be more like a jazz improvisation than a military drill. You don't know what note comes next, but if you're listening, you'll know how to respond. And in that response, you might discover a deeper kind of order, one that wasn't built by your ego, but that includes you in its unfolding. It doesn't require effort to sustain. It doesn't punish you for failing. It just keeps going, with or without your plans, with or without your permission. And all it asks of you is this: be here, be honest, be willing to listen, and then move. When Alan Watts stood before a room full of military researchers and declared, "I live completely selfishly," he wasn't making a joke, nor was he being ironic. He was being precise. In a culture that reflexively labels selfishness as immoral, Watts reframed it as unavoidable. Everyone is selfish, everyone acts in pursuit of what they perceive as good for them, even when that good is disguised as virtue, sacrifice, or duty. But the shock of his statement comes not from the selfishness itself, it comes from what follows. If I live selfishly, then what exactly do I want? What am I aiming for? What do I believe will make me whole? And, most uncomfortably, who or what is the I that desires? At first, these seem like straightforward questions. You want a better job? A more loving relationship? Good food? Maybe a sense of purpose? But the moment you begin to examine these wants, they start slipping through your fingers. Because none of them, when you look closely, are about you in isolation. The job you want is validated by others who recognize your title. The relationship you crave requires another person to see you as lovable. The food tastes good because it interacts with your senses. The purpose you pursue is often meaningful only in a social or spiritual context. In other words, everything you desire involves something or someone outside of yourself. So if everything you want is relational, then is there such a thing as a purely separate you? What pushes this further by dissecting the idea of the self that exists independently of the world. He points out that when you say, "I want pleasure," what you're really saying is that you want to experience something through sensation, whether it's the taste of wine, the touch of a lover, or the thrill of recognition. But those experiences are not contained within the self. They are interactions. The wine is not you, but it becomes part of your experience when you drink it. The lover is not you, but they help constitute your sense of emotional fulfillment. The promotion isn't you, but it feeds your ego through the feedback loop of status. Now imagine someone obsessed with achievement. They strive endlessly, working long hours, crushing goals, ascending ladders. Ask them why, and they might say, "Because I want to be successful." But what is success? If pressed, they'll likely point to markers that only make sense in relation to others. Money, accolades, admiration. In essence, they want to be seen. They want their existence validated externally. Strip away the audience, and their sense of success collapses. What they're truly seeking isn't success, it's confirmation that they matter. And that confirmation cannot exist in a vacuum. It requires a stage and spectators. This is the crux of Watt's insight. The self is not a standalone object. It is a process of relationship. It is a verb, not a noun. You're not a sealed-off entity moving through space, bumping into other sealed-off entities. You're a field of consciousness constantly in exchange with your surroundings. You don't just see the world, you're shaped by what you see, how you interpret it, how it responds to you. Your sense of I is built from this constant feedback loop. Take a simple moment. Walking through a grocery store, you feel annoyed at the slow shopper ahead of you. That emotion doesn't arise from nowhere, it comes from your expectations, your schedule, your history of how people should behave. The world triggers you, and you trigger the world. Even in mundane moments, you are in relationship. You're not just watching the movie, you are in it, and it's responding to your performance. So what happens when we don't understand this relational nature of the self? We begin to believe in the illusion of the false self, a rigid, separate identity that must be defended, upgraded, and polished. This false self clings to labels: smart, kind, spiritual, successful. It builds a resume of character traits and achievements. It defines itself against others. I'm not like them. I am better. I'm different. And then it spends all its energy protecting those boundaries. What's understood that this false self is not evil, it's just unnecessary. It's a placeholder we cling to because the alternative feels terrifying. If I am not the stories I tell myself, then what am I? If I am not my achievements, my trauma, my personality, then where do I exist? But what Watts gently points to is that the real self doesn't need a story. It doesn't need to be admired or defended. It just is. It arises naturally from your participation in the present moment, from your direct contact with life. And it cannot be separated from what it touches. This is where desire becomes illuminating. Because desire, when traced to its roots, reveals not just what we want, but what we believe we lack. It reveals the contours of the self we're trying to construct. If you desire power, maybe you believe you're weak. If you crave approval, maybe you believe you're invisible. If you hunger for love, maybe you believe you're unlovable. But all of these beliefs are inherited. They're shaped by upbringing, culture, and circumstance. and because they arise in relation to others. The self that holds them is not self-made, it is co-authored. Let's take love as an example. Everyone wants love, but what most people call love is often a contract. I will give you attention and affection if you make me feel wanted, needed, safe. That's not love, that's negotiation. That's the false self trading emotional currency. Real love, by contrast, arises when the boundaries between self and other soften. It's not about owning or being owned. It's about being with. It's about presence without demand. And it's only possible when the false self quiets down enough to let connection happen. This leads to a radical conclusion. If everything you want depends on something outside of you, then maybe the you who wants isn't a separate being at all. Maybe it's a node in a network. A center of experience, yes, but not a solitary one. You're always in relationship to people, to nature, to sensation, to time. You cannot escape it. Even in isolation, your mind is filled with echoes of others, their voices, their expectations, their judgments. Solitude doesn't eliminate relationship. It reveals how deeply embedded you already are. What wasn't trying to dissolve individuality into a gray mass of sameness. He wasn't saying you don't exist. He was saying you don't exist the way you think you do. You're not a fixed object moving through space, you're a fluid process arising within context. Just as a wave isn't separate from the ocean, you are not separate from your environment. You rise and fall with it. Your shape is its shape. This perspective also transforms our relationship to power. When we believe in the false self, we seek power as domination over others, over circumstances, over uncertainty. We want to be in control because we think control equals safety. But from the viewpoint of interconnected selfhood, power isn't about control, it's about coherence. It's about being aligned with the forces that move through you rather than resisting them. It's about knowing when to act and when to yield. True power doesn't shout, it resonates. That's why Watts could say, without irony, I live completely selfishly. He didn't mean he hoarded resources or disregarded others. He meant he lived in alignment with what was real for him. And because the real self is inherently relational, acting in its interest often serves others as well. When you honor your true needs, not your ego's demands, but your soul's longings, you don't exploit people. You engage with them authentically. You don't manipulate, you collaborate. Think of an artist who creates not to impress, but to express. Their work might move thousands, but its origin was not external validation. It was inner necessity. Or consider a teacher who teaches not to control a classroom, but to ignite curiosity. Their impact radiates outward, but it begins with an internal coherence. This is what it means to live selfishly in the Wattsian sense. To live from the center of your being, knowing that your being is not separate. In daily life, this awareness changes everything. You stop asking, what should I be doing to become more valuable? And start asking, what wants to move through me? You stop chasing image and start listening to impulse, not the impulse of craving, but the impulse of clarity. You begin to trust that what arises authentically in you has a place in the world, not because you're special, but because you're part of it. This doesn't mean you never struggle. Life still brings pain, loss, confusion. But those experiences don't threaten your identity, because your identity isn't based on performance. You no longer need to prove your worth, because worth is not a currency, it's a condition of existence. So when you desire something, a lover, a home, a success, ask not just whether you deserve it. Ask what in you believes it is missing. Ask whether the self that wants it is the self that is real. And then ask, if all I want requires connection, then who am I really without that connection? This inquiry isn't meant to dissolve you, it's meant to reveal you. Not the you perform, but the you that is always there when the performance ends. The you that feels joy in silence, that sees beauty in small things, that knows itself not through isolation, but through relation. That self is not an illusion. It's just quieter than the one you usually listen to. It doesn't announce itself with ambition or anxiety. It emerges when you stop trying to be someone and start allowing yourself to be something, an event, a movement, a wave in the larger sea of life. And once you taste that self, even briefly, you realize that all you're seeking was not about becoming more. It was about remembering that you are not alone, never have been, and never could be. The idea that true living comes not from calculation, resistance, or reaction, but from presence, is perhaps one of the most difficult truths to accept in the modern world. We're conditioned to believe that control equals freedom, that the more we can map, strategize, optimize, and dominate our environment, the more successful and fulfilled we'll be. But Alan Watts invites us to consider something far more radical, that life doesn't need to be controlled to be meaningful. In fact, life begins to feel meaningful the moment we stop trying to control it. Living without calculation doesn't mean living without care. It means surrendering the illusion that care requires control. This kind of surrender is not passive. It's not about giving up or giving in. It's about aligning with the way things already are, instead of constantly pushing against them. And it requires a shift in our entire mode of being, from trying to force our way through reality to learning how to move with it. What's often compared this to dancing rather than marching. In a dance, you're not trying to get somewhere. You're not measuring progress. You're feeling into rhythm, responding, playing. The joy is in the participation, not in the arrival. And real life, he said, is much more like a dance than a business plan. To make this more concrete, consider the way plants grow. You can't yank a seedling into maturity. You can't force a rose to bloom by screaming at it. Growth has its own timing, its own wisdom. The seed doesn't sit in the soil worrying about how to become a tree. It doesn't draft 5-year goals. It simply responds to its environment's sunlight, water, temperature, and grows from within. And yet, that doesn't mean it's passive. The growth is real, powerful, inevitable. It's just not effortful in the way we define effort. It's emergent. It unfolds. Human transformation, Watts suggested, works the same way. This is where the concept of grace enters the picture, not in the religious sense of being rewarded by a distant deity, but in the experiential sense of discovering that real change, the kind that heals and frees us, often comes when we stop trying to manufacture it. Grace isn't something you earn. It's something you allow. It's what happens when you get out of your own way, when you stop trying to become and start letting yourself be. We've all had moments like this. You might be wrestling with a problem for weeks, an emotional wound, a creative block, a decision you can't make. You analyze, journal, talk to friends, push yourself to figure it out. Nothing works. Then, one day, when you're walking or showering or staring out a window, boom, clarity drops in. Not because you forced it, but because you finally stopped grasping. That's grace. That's the intelligence of the unforced unfolding. And once you've experienced it, even once, you know in your bones that some of the most important changes in your life will not come through discipline or striving. They will come through space. And yet, this is perhaps the hardest message to hear in a culture built on hustle. We're so attached to the myth of self-improvement as a kind of battle us versus ourselves, willing our way into a better version. We think that if we aren't constantly grinding, we're failing. But what dismantles that idea with surgical precision? He asks, what if you're already what you're trying to become? What if the striving is actually the distraction? This doesn't mean growth isn't real. It means that growth isn't linear. It means that becoming more yourself doesn't look like climbing a ladder. It looks like shedding what you're not. And that process is more about unlearning than achieving, more about opening than pushing. The paradox is that when you finally let go of the need to become someone, you become more authentically yourself. When you stop reacting to life, trying to fix it, fight it, flee from it, you start seeing it clearly. Reaction is always a distortion. It's based on old wounds, outdated fears, inherited narratives. Observation, by contrast, is clean. When you observe life instead of reacting to it, you begin to notice its subtleties. You see patterns. You feel rhythms. You get curious instead of defensive. And this curiosity is the gateway to presence. To live in this way is not to be disengaged, it's to be deeply engaged without being entangled. You participate in life not because you're trying to win, but because you're in relationship with it. You're not climbing a mountain, you're walking a path. And along the way, the need to be right or in control starts to fade. It's replaced by a deeper trust. Not trust in outcomes, but trust in process. Trust in yourself not as a master planner, but as a participant in something larger and more mysterious. This doesn't make life easier. In fact, letting go of control can be terrifying. It feels like death to the ego. The part of you that has spent decades believing it's responsible for everything doesn't surrender easily. It tells you that if you stop trying, everything will fall apart, that you'll become lazy, irrelevant, unworthy. But when you actually try it, when you loosen your grip and let life breathe, you discover something shocking. Things don't fall apart. They often come together more gracefully than before. Life starts to feel less like a battlefield and more like a conversation. And that conversation deepens your capacity to hold contradiction, to live in paradox, to exist in spaces where there are no easy answers. You realize that enlightenment isn't a state you reach. It's a quality of attention you bring. It's the ability to be with things as they are, without constantly trying to reshape them. It's the strength to let pain be pain, joy be joy, change be change. That doesn't mean you become passive or fatalistic. It means you stop resisting what is already happening, and in doing so, you gain the ability to respond with wisdom. Wisdom, in this context, is not the same as knowledge. It's not about what you know, it's about how you see. It's about what kind of eyes you bring to your experience. Are you looking through the lens of fear, scarcity, and control? Or through the lens of openness, curiosity, and flow? Watts's entire philosophy points us toward the latter not as an idea, but as a practice, a way of being, a way of walking through the world with less tension and more trust. Imagine someone who has spent their entire life trying to fix themselves. They read all the books, go to all the workshops, follow all the gurus. They're exhausted. Then one day they stop, not because they've given up, but because they realize there's nothing left to chase. They sit in their room, look out the window, and for the first time in decades, they feel at peace. Not because everything is perfect, but because they're no longer demanding that it be. That moment, quiet, undramatic, free of fanfare, is a moment of awakening. And the beauty is, it's available to everyone. You don't need to be a monk or a mystic. You don't need to renounce your job or your relationships. You just need to shift how you relate to them. Instead of using life as a tool for self-definition, you let it be a mirror. Instead of constantly acting upon it, you listen to it. You let it speak. And when you do, you hear things you never noticed before. The sound of your own breath, the rhythm of your body, the quiet intelligence moving through all things. This is not philosophy as abstraction, it's philosophy as embodiment. It's not about believing in a new idea. It's about becoming less identified with all ideas. It's about being here now, with fewer layers between you and the real. And in that presence, something shifts. You stop seeking peace as a future destination, and you start recognizing it as a present condition. Not always comfortable, not always joyful, but always available. Because peace is not the absence of difficulty, it's the absence of resistance. Watts's work at its core is not about telling you how to live. It's about helping you see that you're already living, that the life you're chasing is not ahead of you, it's happening right now. And the only thing keeping you from feeling it fully is the belief that it should be something else. So what remains? Not certainty, not perfection, but stillness, a kind of quiet joy, a sense that you're not separate from life, but part of it. And from that place, you don't need answers. You don't need control. You don't even need meaning in the traditional sense. You just need to be here, breathing, watching, participating. And that is enough. That is more than enough. You made it to the end, and maybe, just maybe, you've seen a glimpse of something real. Not a trick, not a hack, not a blueprint, but a stillness, a shift. You felt, perhaps, the truth behind Watts' words, that you don't need to force your way through this life. That growth doesn't always come through effort. That peace doesn't wait for you at the end of checklist, but breathes here with you, in this moment, in this body, in this now. We've talked about how change can be like a seed growing not because you yell at it to grow, but because it's supported, because it's given room. And isn't that what you are too? A seed, a rhythm, a part of something ancient that's unfolding in its own time. Maybe you've realized that your attempts to fix yourself were never the problem, they were just a misunderstanding. A belief that life needed to be micromanaged, that you had to earn ease. That surrender was weakness. But maybe now, you see that surrender is just the moment your hands stop clenching and your heart starts opening. And maybe if we're lucky, you walk away from this video, not with more answers, but with more trust. Not with more things to do, but with more space to feel. And in that space, there is grace. Because grace doesn't come when you check all the boxes. It doesn't show up when you're finally good enough. Grace is what's left when you stop trying to prove anything. It's what finds you when you finally stop running. It doesn't ask for credentials. It just asks, are you willing to receive? And if you are, then you already know you don't have to force the next step. You don't have to become anything. You're already part of the process. The path is walking you. So don't try to remember everything from this video. Let it wash over you like a wave. Let what matters stick. Let the rest fall away. And if something shifted for you, if you found a pocket of silence, a moment of insight, a feeling that maybe you're not as far away from peace as you thought, then I'd love to hear from you in the comments. What opened? What softened? What did you let go of? And please, if this resonated, if this kind of reflection nourishes you, click like, share it with someone you care about, and subscribe for more like this. We're not chasing algorithms here, we're tending to something more sacred. Attention, presence, awareness. If you'd like to support the channel and help more people find these moments of quiet truth, you can also hit that super thanks button and contribute directly. Every bit helps, and I thank you from my heart. You're not alone in this. We're walking together, even in silence, even from afar. Until next time, keep listening, not for noise, but for the stillness underneath it. That's where the real answers live. I'll see you in the next one.